In this Ellerton Associates Technology Training Tip of the Month, we'll look at using the timeline view in Project. Okay, I have Microsoft Project up and running. I'm using version 2016 for this demonstration, but the timeline was introduced in version 2010 and has been carried forward in each version since. Now, Microsoft has made some enhancements to it over those versions, but what I'm going to show you are things that I know will work in all of the versions from 2010 on forward. So the idea of the timeline is that when you add tasks to the task list, you set in their durations, sequence them so that the dates are correct, you get a Gantt chart. The Gantt chart is the standard diagram view of a project. The Gantt chart, however, is made for project managers. So this project is fairly simple, and even at that, the Gantt chart could be perceived as a little bit complex. Now, if you want to share this with other people so that they understand the sequencing and the timing of the tasks in the project and what's going on when, non-project management people might find this a little daunting and hard to understand. And this is with a very simple plan. Imagine a much more complex plan with many more tasks and many more dependencies. It can get very complex to look at a Gantt chart. So the timeline is an alternative, a simplistic timeline view of the project. Another benefit being you can add only the tasks you want, like just the summary tasks, and skip the actual individual work tasks to make it even more simple, whereas the Gantt chart's just going to display all of them. So there's a lot of benefits to setting up and formatting a timeline and then using that as a way to communicate to project stakeholders who are not project management geared in general. So what I'm going to do is set up my timeline. Now the timeline is displayed above the Gantt chart by default. There are no tasks added to it by default. You have to do that. But if the timeline doesn't display here above your Gantt chart, it can be turned off. You can go to View, and in the Split View group, there's a timeline checkmark. So just to show you, you can remove it if it's getting in your way, and then add it back when you want to work with it. So I'm going to click in the timeline pane. That will display the Timeline Tools Format tab. That's where all the options for working with it are. Just be aware, if I click back in the Gantt chart part of the view, then I'm working with the Gantt chart tools. The timeline tools disappeared. I do have to click in the timeline pane to be able to see the timeline tools. I can also make the timeline pane larger by dragging its border down a little bit. You might want to do that while you're working with it. So now I'm going to add some tasks. Now if you look at the Timeline Tools Format tab, there's an Insert group, and I have existing tasks, and then I have Task and Milestone. Now this option would create a brand new task or milestone. I would not recommend creating tasks directly on the timeline. I'd still use the task list Gantt chart view for that. Once they're in there properly sequenced, then I'd come up to existing tasks to add these to the timeline. So I'm going to start just by creating a timeline of these summaries, phase 1 and the milestones. Phase 1 complete, phase 2, and phase 2 complete, and phase 3, and phase 3 complete. Now, that's not overwhelming, but initially you are not seeing the detailed timeline. The idea is, if I keep this pane smaller, this is a nice small view of the project in the timeline. It doesn't take up much room, but if I really want to work with it and make it more useful up on Timeline Tools Format, I'll want to click Detailed Timeline. Now that brings, I'm going to make this bigger too, now that brings in some information like the task names and dates. Much more useful this way, but it takes up more room. Now, if I want to format how this looks, there's a couple ways to do it. Some things can be done as a group. For example, if I go to this Text Styles button, I can click on what I want to change, like all of the task names overall. Notice that task name and milestone name are two different things, but I'm going to go with task name, and I'm just going to make it 10 points. And note that the task names became larger. By the way, the milestones already are 10 points, so I won't change those. For changing the colors, I can't do that as a group. I have to click on, say, phase 1 bar and go up to the fill color button and change the fill color for each one individually. So let me get a different fill color on each of these phases to help tell them apart. So that's not bad. Now this is a pretty small project, so I think I'm going to try putting all the tasks on the timeline too. So I'm going to go up to existing tasks, not the project summary task because that would just stretch across the whole thing, but the rest of these I'm going to add. Now I'm going to just add the main interview employees. I don't feel like I need to break it out there. They happen concurrently, but I'll get the rest of these on here. Okay, and that got a little more complex. Note it was smart enough to use the same color for the tasks in the phase. That's kind of cool. But what I might want to do is now make the phases callouts. So right now, all tasks besides milestones are displayed as bars. But if I click this phase 1 bar, look at over here in current selection, I can display it as a callout. And then it's above the line with kind of a bracket showing where it belongs. I'm going to click phase 2 and do the same. And I'm going to click phase 3 and do the same. So this is kind of nice. Now I got the actual tasks on there. By the way, this task, final meeting preparations, didn't achieve the color of phase 3. I can do that manually if I want to. Right there. And I can make some adjustments just by dragging. I'm going to click on this phase 1 task. I'm going to try to make the bar a little taller. Notice how the phase 1 and phase 2 call out bar is kind of overlapping. I'm going to move this one up. That was phase 2 though. Here, let me move phase 1 up. There we go. And then I can move phase 3 up to be even with phase 2. I just didn't want them overlapping. It can be a little tricky sometimes to get them sized correctly, but you can see how I might do that. And I might go ahead and take phase 2 and move it down a little bit more. But in any event, I can click on the name of a task and do individual formatting to the name or to the color of the bar or callout. By the way, the fill color here will affect the callout color. So you can see now phase 1's callout bar turned red. I'll go ahead and do that by clicking the name of the phase for the other 2 callouts. So this is actually looking pretty good. Now that I've set it up, I can go ahead and just turn off detailed timeline, readjust this so it's smaller. And when I don't need it for anything, I can leave it like that. But let's say now I want to share it. I've got a PowerPoint presentation here that I'm building about our project, and I want to add a copy of the timeline to it. So I'm going to click back in the Timeline tab. I am going to expand it to a detailed timeline. And then I want to make a copy of this. So that's the other neat thing. On the Format tab, the Timeline Tools Format tab, you have Copy Timeline. Now the for email version is fairly narrow and small. For presentation is absolutely perfect for most PowerPoint slides and Word documents. Full size is really big. It's like 17 inches wide. Now you can always resize the picture that results, but I'm thinking for presentation's the way to go. I'm going to click that. Now what happened was a copy of the timeline is put onto the Windows clipboard. So I'm going to go over to PowerPoint. Now you have to be careful here. If I click the top half of paste, well, you might think, well, that's not what I wanted, but it depends on the paste option you choose. I could have clicked the lower half of paste to see the options. Now that I've actually pasted, I have the options over here. You want to paste it as a picture. That's where it comes out looking like it did in Project. So there we are, and notice it does fit perfectly on this slide, though again, it is a picture. So I can go ahead and try to make some adjustments to it, move it around, and there we go. And I'll go back over to Project. So that is the idea of the timeline in Project. Thanks for watching. To learn more about our classes, please visit us at www.ellerttraining.com.